Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Larry Brant, former Navy chaplain, pastoral counselor with 25 plus years in ministry, emergency services, and combat zones. So we'll explore with him and learn more about moral injury, about how he, about his frontline experiences to discuss how trauma affects our sense of meaning, the difference between healing the mind and restoring the spirit, and how spiritual care offers a critical pathway to hope and wholeness after profound crisis. Welcome to the show, Larry.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Larry. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about trauma, we'll talk about faith, and we'll also talk about moral injury that you talk about. So we'll talk about all this. But before that, let's talk a bit about your journey, your background, so that people know, audience knows who they are listening to.
All right. Well, I'll try to make this quick, but uh, I am currently 61 years old. Um, I'm actually still an active duty Navy chaplain. I'll be exiting the Navy this summer and then entering into other type of government work, a government ministry, actually. But I grew up in the middle part of the United States. If your listeners and watchers are familiar with the United States, I grew up in the area around St. Louis, Missouri, which is right in the middle of the country. Um, Went to college, married my college sweetheart. After college, I felt like God was calling me uh, to ministry. So, specifically, um, actually worship ministry, leading the music of the church. And so I got a bachelor's and a master's degree in music. And then for 25 years, led Christian worship services across the Southern Baptist denomination in different churches. And then the last few years of that, I was in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is in the upper plains in the middle of the United States. And while I was there, uh, some of my congregants, some of the people in my congregation were police and firefighters. They were first responders, and they approached me and they just said, "Hey, we think you've got a great temperament to be a volunteer chaplain for the city." And I asked my senior pastor if he had any issue for me doing that, and he did not. And so I joined that volunteer ministry with the city. And then over the next 8 years or so, I actually rose to where I was leading that ministry for the city and had about 30 volunteer chaplains that I worked with and supervised. It was really interesting, and what a privilege to be able to go to the mayor of the city, our police chief, our fire chief, be able to walk into their offices and just say, "How can I best pray for you today?" That was a great privilege to be able to do. But I think God was preparing my heart um, for something even more. And so in 2007, my denomination was having a chaplaincy training. And while my wife and I were there, we both felt the call for me to join the military. The interesting thing was, I was already too old. I didn't have the right degree, and I wasn't at the right physical requirements. And so, over the next year and a half, I went back to school and got the appropriate degree and lost 110 pounds, and then got an age waiver. And in August of 2009, at 45 years of age, I joined the United States Navy. And then a little over a year after that, I found myself in the conflict in Afghanistan with a Marine Corps infantry battalion on the front lines. Um, Not only ministering to the Marines who were on the front lines, actually being on the front lines with, um, firefights happening around me, people actually trying to kill me because I was a religious leader for the Marines. Um, and so over the next several years, just continuing to minister to Marines, to Navy sailors, to United States Coast Guardsmen, because chaplains, Navy chaplains, minister to all three of those branches. Um, and then in 2020, I was selected for continuing education to get the credentials to be able to work in a Navy hospital. And those credentials are called Clinical Pastoral Education, or CPE for short. And so I was selected to go through the Navy CPE program in San Diego, California. Went through that program at the height of COVID. So I did two residencies during that year. I did a residency at at the Naval Hospital in San Diego, nicknamed Balboa, and then I did a residency for our Veterans Affairs Administration at their medical center, and they assigned me to a PTSD domiciliary called the Aspire Center. And what a PTSD domiciliary is this particular place took homeless veterans who had PTSD off the streets of San Diego. And over the course of 6 months, they lived at the facility. We helped them to get clean, and we addressed their PTSD and moral injury. And I'll explain more about that in a moment. Um, and to help them stay clean. And then we found them jobs and we found them housing. And the great thing is this particular place has about an 85% success rate, which is phenomenal in this type of mental health. And so um, as I continued to do that, then when I left there and had the credentials, I came to work here at Naval Hospital 29 Palms, which is in the Mojave Desert at a Marine Corps training base. And it might even be possible that some of your Indian military have been here because we have a lot of our friendly nations come here for training. So it's very possible that some folks in your country have actually been to my base in Southern California for training. And while we were here, my thinking was I could take the training that I learned in CPE and working at the Aspire Center and began working with active duty uh, so that they didn't begin making the mistakes that ended their military careers, that ended their life, that ended their marriages. And so we began having PTSD and moral injury groups here at 29 Palms, and we really saw a difference being made. And so after that, I started working on my doctorate, um, and using my dissertation was on educating local pastors, local chaplains on what moral injury was, because a lot of people understand PTSD. They understand that PTSD is fear based trauma, where something happens to you. It's so shocking, it's so scary that it breaks you down emotionally, and you become very fearful, very paranoid, uh, very afraid of what could happen. I understand this because I have PTSD myself from my combat experience. Um, but what many people don't really understand is what moral injury is. And moral injury is kind of like the flip side of PTSD. PTSD is when something happens to you. Moral injury is when you choose to do something, sometimes under the direction of someone in authority over you, or or you intentionally fail to prevent something, and the result of that just goes against everything that you believe morally, ethically, and especially spiritually, to the point that it just breaks you emotionally and spiritually, and you feel consumed with guilt and shame, to the point that you back away from literally everything. You back away from your faith, you back away from your friends, and especially you back away from your trauma and you isolate yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely, Larry. So, to understand it from a common person's perspective, let's understand moral injury much work. Is it only in the army, or is it in the navy or the armed forces, or is it also outside in the corporate world? Everywhere we are, in different situations, just to keep a job or anything else, we keep on doing so many things that we that are not part of our core values, that will hurt us beyond beyond that particular moment. Help us understand also from that context, Larry, about moral intuition. Why
You,
is that the only option we have
you're exactly
to
correct.
prevent ourselves?
Yes,
Yes.
you are exactly correct. It is not just in the military that moral injury happens. Let's look at several different perspectives. You highlighted one. You highlighted the corporate world. I spoke to someone recently the other day who left the corporate world because of moral injury. They were working as an executive for a very well known corporation, and the leader of that corporation told this individual to change some reports, to do some things that, quite frankly, were wrong. And the choice was given to this individual: either you do this or you're no longer employed with this company. And at that time, the person did not have very much confidence in themselves. They were afraid of losing their job, so they manipulated the reports. And then later on, they felt very guilty, very shameful of what they did, and then really began to thinking that they weren't worth much as a person, definitely not much as an executive. And then they eventually left the company. But what they did under the direction of that senior individual has haunted them ever since. Another situation that we can look at would be in healthcare. We know the damage that COVID did just a few years ago, and when I was doing my residency at Naval Hospital San Diego, I was the ICU chaplain at the height of COVID, the intensive care unit chaplain. And so we were losing on average one person a day in that unit. And sometimes it was we would lose a husband in December, and then in January, the wife came in with COVID and we lost her too. And we were dealing with the emotions of the adult children. We were dealing with the emotions of the medical care providers, the nurses, and the doctors who really felt absolutely helpless in dealing with this virus and questioning their own ability to be able to provide health care for people. And they felt very guilty. They felt very ashamed that they weren't able to stop these individuals from dying, especially at the rate that they were passing. I can honestly say, as being that chaplain of that unit during COVID, I saw more people die in that ICU than I saw on the battlefield in Afghanistan. Uh, Another example would be first responders. You have first responders who are responding to emergencies out in the street, whether law enforcement or firefighters or paramedics or those kinds of things. And they say they have to make very quick, snap decisions that are life dependent. And sometimes they don't make the right decision. They may not have enough information, or sometimes they just don't make the right decision, and then that decision haunts them. They question themselves. They lose their self-confidence, and they no longer think that they are worthy or able to be able to continue in that position. um, and then one final example may be somebody who endures a physical or sexual assault, and maybe their body reacts in a particular way during that assault that they are very ashamed of, or sometimes the perpetrator is telling them during the assault, after the assault, um, that the only reason that this happened to you was because of your actions. You forced me to do this, which we all know is a lie. But if that's told to the person being assaulted enough, they come to believe it. So they think that the assault is actually their fault, and that they did something to deserve it. All of that can get wrapped up and is examples of moral injury that we see today.
Absolutely, absolutely, Larry. So, how should we understand moral injury? Because in today's time, it's a global world. Technology brings so many things together, people together, cultures together, you know, deployments together from different places. And in one culture, one thing must be, or in one person's life, one thing must be okay. In another person's life, it will not be okay. The same difference between a vegetarian, a non vegetarian, and a vegan.
Hmm.
I want to understand then in these times, how do I ensure that I am not morally injured? And also ensure that, because not every time somebody will have a bad sort of an example that I will have to follow. Things will be like that, that I will also not know what is right or what is wrong, and suddenly something will happen, and I'll feel that impact of moral injury later on without me having any chance to blame anyone. From all those perspectives, even from a soldier's perspective, if you see, things have become so political everywhere.
Hmm.
You may fight the biggest battle of your life, even kill people, thinking that they are the enemies, and later you come to know that this was all business for the political leaders. Some people were deciding the fate of people on the ground, including the one who killed or got killed. That can also lead to moral injury, because the more facts you know, the more you will understand that what you fought for was actually not the, it was a sham, it was the wrong reason. It's a difficult thing to digest, but human beings are complex. The creatures and simple creatures at the same time, they have a lot of time to digest those things, later on more information, and then the realizations keep with it. As they say, you take action immediately, but you repent in leisure or something like that. Help us understand, as a chaplain, as an individual, as someone, as you said, are also suffering from the impact of PTSD yourself.
Yes. Well, when it comes to resilience, or the ability to bounce back when bad things happen, either to you or things that you have caused, there's that ability to really understand what are your left and right lateral limits. What are things that you're going to do? What I'm doing right now is working with Marines and sailors and helping them to understand what what will they do, what will they not do when they enter into the battlefield, so that years later, just as you said, when they reflect on it years later, um, they're not eaten up with guilt and shame because they reacted out of emotions versus uh, reacting out of training, out of clarity, and the fog of war as well. And with that, we have to understand those years later, as we begin to reflect on things, um, we need to make sure that we understand that we place blame where blame lies. Um, where sometimes we do an action, but just as you said, we're doing an action. Maybe we weren't told the truth about our enemy.
Right.
Maybe, just as you said, what was going on was political maneuvering, business maneuvering. Um, but so many times, because of the action that takes place, we place all of that blame upon ourselves. And what we need to do is we need to step back and take a look at the bigger perspective. Are we really the only person to blame because of that situation? Or were we given bad information? Were we told to do something based on a perspective that we weren't aware of? And therefore, the blame does not totally belong on us. There is actually needs to be some sharing of the blame, but so often people with moral injury tend to want to take all of that blame and put it onto themselves. But if we can help them step back, take a look at that, and understand that there's a bigger perspective going on here, and that they are not the ones that need to shoulder the entire blame. That there's some other things going on as well, helping them to understand that they are not solely responsible for what happened. They were just the engine that caused it to happen. That's some of the ways that we do in helping them doing that. And another thing that we do is helping them understand that they are just simply human beings, simple human beings, and humans do not make the right decision all of the time. And helping them to understand that, helping them to come to the point where they are not infected with evil the way some people believe that they are, and then helping them to see that there is a God who loves them and wants to forgive them. And quite often, as you mentioned, it's that self forgiveness that's the greatest hurdle of all. And so we work with them on that self forgiveness, looking at that situation, and a lot of times through that self forgiveness, the way we get to there is by helping them to gain a perspective outside of themselves. Remember, like I was saying, looking at the situation and making sure to understand who exactly is to blame in this situation. Let's share that blame and maybe even see if some greater meaning came out of that. And if they can have that and they can begin to look at that perspective outside of themselves, then they can begin to realize that uh, they are just a person who made a mistake and who can be forgiven and can be restored from this.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Larry. One thing I want to understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it that foot soldiers, or even in corporate or in day to day life, people who are working on the ground, they are much more prone to things called ethics, code, everything else, and it hurts them more? And not perhaps senior people, either in military or in corporate life or in administration or in politics? Does it hurt? Have you seen what is the ratio in terms of common foot soldiers and the officers and the higher ups, even in corporate and everywhere else? If it is what I am saying is correct, why is it so? Is it that when you grow higher, you start the ground looks very small and it does not impact you?
You know, that's an excellent question. No one's ever asked me that question before. But as I reflect on it and as I think about the majority of the people that I have worked with, I would say the majority of the people I've worked with are the quote unquote foot soldiers, those who are the frontline people, the frontline military, frontline healthcare, frontline first responder. Um, they are the ones, because they're the ones actually committing the action that causes them moral injury. And while there are a few people in the upper echelon, um, what's interesting is those in the upper echelon who are struggling with moral injury, much of the moral injury they're struggling with happened when they were foot soldiers. And it just happens to be, as you mentioned, years later, as they reflect on it, that they begin to struggle with the decisions that they made. And it may very well be in that those later are removed from themselves. Now, one thing we are seeing is we are seeing, um, especially people dealing with the drone strikes and the intelligence officers who are coming up with the decisions on those drone strikes.
Right.
We are seeing more and more of those individuals showing signs of moral injury, even though they're not on the battlefield. But it's very difficult for them to, say, walk into a trailer in Nevada somewhere, use a drone to kill people in another part of the world, and then they go home to their family that night. We're seeing many of these individuals really struggle with that because of just that detachment. Those two worlds just do not seem to work together, and they're really struggling with going to work to kill people and then coming home that evening and working on their children's homework. That just seems like a dichotomy of worlds that they really have a lot of problems uh, reconciling.
Absolutely, absolutely. You explained this, and the drone thing, you absolutely explained it well. This is a strange world we are living in. We don't even know the type of people or the people who we are killing, perhaps knowingly, unknowingly, or whatever it is, in the name of job or whatever it is that we think of. That's a very larger thing that is for the world to think. But in terms of the moral injury, what does it impact? Does it impact the body? Does it impact the mind? Does it impact the soul? Does it impact anything beyond that, Larry?
Excellent. Boy, you got good questions today. Um, I think it impacts it all. I think we can see um, that the stress of dealing with moral injury can impact the body. Uh, that could either be the emotional stress that deals with mental health, because we'll see, as I have said a few times, guilt says I did something bad, shame says I am bad, moral injury says I'm unlovable and I'm unforgivable. And the combination of those stressors, they can definitely have an impact on the body. That high stress environment can have an impact on an individual's cardio system. Uh, they may choose to eat their stress. I can think of one gentleman that we worked with, after dealing with his moral injury and PTSD in our workshop that we have. Um, he lost 50 pounds just simply because he stopped eating his stress. Whenever he felt anxious, he would eat something. And then as he began to work through everything and he got himself right with himself, he got himself right with his family, he got himself right with God. After that, that anxiety began to dissipate, and he stopped eating every time that he was anxious, and he lost 50 pounds. We see that their whole demeanor changes, where they may be very abrupt, very grumpy, very no nonsense, as they begin to deal with this moral injury and begin to get back into a right relationship with self, others, and God. Then we'll also see that that personality begins to change. They begin to be more open. They begin to be more jovial. They begin to be a happier person overall because they no longer think of themselves as corrupted and evil. Um, and so there's also, more importantly, the soul. Moral injury is a soul injury. And we feel that because of what we've done, we've separated ourselves off from God. We can talk about other people forgiven, but we no longer believe that we're forgivable ourselves. But once that individual has begun dealing with that moral injury and their PTSD, because quite often someone with moral injury may also have PTSD because they were in a fear based trauma situation and then they reacted, and that reaction may have been what caused them moral injury in some cases. Then as they realize and they begin to do that, they begin to see things not just from their perspective, but they begin to see things from God's perspective. Then that heals their soul, and they feel like they can um, come underneath the love of God once again. So it impacts physically, it impacts emotionally and mentally, and it impacts spiritually. It is literally a triple threat.
Absolutely, absolutely. You explained it well, Larry. It impacts in so many ways. And that is where I want to understand, how does it all impact you when people like these, several of these, come to you. Like in the battlefield, a splinter, a missile, a torpedo, or anything else will not differentiate between a foot soldier or a chaplain. Will such injuries, when they come to you, and you have to listen and also try and find a solution for them because you would want to help them, how does that impact you? Because that will not differentiate between, you know, anyone else as well as a chaplain, except that you are a chaplain and you have some experience in this.
Now, how does that impact me? Well, the way that that impacts me, obviously, is that um, if I don't take care of myself as I listen and counsel these individuals and hear their stories of great pain and hurt that they've caused, hurt that they've received, what I have to do is I have to practice good self care. I have to have a safe place where I can vent. I have to do things that feed my soul, that feed me as an individual. I have to intentionally take care of myself. So if you can imagine a well out in the middle of a piece of property that people come to and get water, um, but if suddenly that well goes dry, then everything that that well did, how it impacts the area around it, suddenly dries up as well. And so, like that well, I have to constantly replenish myself so that I'm not dry, I'm not at the end of my rope. And then, if that happens, I'm no longer to help those individuals who need that counsel, who need that guidance. And so, first thing I have to do is make sure that I take care of myself so that I can continue to help and take care of others. And that's what uh, every leader, every counselor, every chaplain, you have got to set boundaries in order that you provide yourself with proper self care. Because there's that temptation to just keep going, keep going, keep going. But the problem is if you do that, sooner or later, you're going to burn yourself out. And then you're no good to yourself and you're no good to these individuals who so desperately need your guidance.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wanted to understand the human side of Chaplain Larry Brant and dealing with that. Let's come to the solution of, moral injury.
Well, with the solution of moral
That
injury, I'm a Christian. I think the big solution to moral injury is coming back to God and working through that, arriving to a place where they begin to see that they are lovable, that they are forgivable, and that there is a safe place. The way that we are working with individuals is we encourage them to do two things at once. We encourage them to begin going to God, and then also finding a safe place, some sort of safe space where they can share what has happened to them, including the decisions that they've made that have caused the moral injury, uh, in a safe, non judgmental environment. And so part of what I have done is I have written a book called Restoring the Broken, and it challenges the Christian church, the local church, and the Christian church as a whole to become that safe place for these individuals. Because so many times these people, as I have said, they have stepped back. They have stepped back from their friends, they have stepped back from their family, they've stepped back from their faith, but at the same time, they so desperately want to tell their story. But they're so afraid that if they do, they're going to be seen as monsters because of the decisions that they have made. And so, one of the things that helps people come back from this moral injury is just being a safe place for them, letting them share their story, not reacting in a judgmental or shocked way, and sitting with them in their pain and not giving quick fixes. We are so famous in the Christian church for when we will begin to hear somebody tell their story. If we let them reach a conclusion, quite frankly, a lot of times we cut them off. If we hear them reach a conclusion, sometimes we may say a quick prayer for them, give them a Bible verse, slap them on the back, and tell them they're good to go. They're not. Yes, can Scripture address the situation? Absolutely, it can and should. But at the same time, it may take a while for these people to heal from these injuries. And so we need to have the patience to sit with them in their pain, not give it a quick fix, but to sit with them and then begin to walk with them back to God, because there is a path to restoration to God. Um, we see that in Scripture. We see David who killed one of his best men over an affair with that man's wife. But yet, afterward, when confronted by the prophet Nathan, David came back to God. Were there earthly consequences to this? Yes, there were. But he was able to forgive himself and come back into a right relationship with God. Then, if you look at the New Testament, we see the Apostle Peter who betrayed Jesus. He said, no, I not once, but three times. He said, I do not know this man. But yet, on the shores of Galilee, Jesus confronted him over that charcoal fire. Remember, it was a charcoal fire where over a charcoal fire that Peter denied Jesus three times. And then on the shore of Galilee, over a charcoal fire on that shore, Jesus looks at Peter and says, Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Not once, but three times, to reinforce not only what Peter had done in the three-time denial, but also to reinforce that Jesus had forgiven him and was giving him a purpose. You mentioned earlier that a lot of times people lose their purpose. That's another effect of moral injury, where they are so consumed with guilt and with shame that they lose their purpose. And as we begin to work with people with moral injury, one thing is we have to confront the sin. Then, after the confrontation of sin, there's that offering of forgiveness, helping them to work through forgiveness with God and forgiveness with self. And then that third step is regaining a sense of purpose, that they have a God given purpose that God wants them to accomplish. And that helps them to be able to pivot and turn away from the past and everything that was done and turn their mind toward the future, learning from the mistakes that they have made in the past.
Absolutely, Larry. So, how do I know that my personal injury is cured, healed? Or is this always a work in progress, Larry?
Many times it's a work in progress, but as we get people together, we have the group that we have here in 29 Palms, and it's not the only group like this. Uh, but what we'll do is these people feel so alone in the decisions that they've made in their moral injury that we have an 8-week course that we do. Uh, and then as we get this small group together, and each person tentatively begins to share their story, what we have seen is that as they begin to share their stories, they begin to realize that they are not alone in how they are feeling. And when they begin to realize that they are not alone, then they begin to open themselves up to that path of restoration. They begin to share with one another. They begin to bond and they begin to support one another in addition to everything we're doing to helping them come back.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Larry. There is so much to learn about all this from you, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you learn more from you, about the things that you do for them, and also learn from your book, what's the best way for them to do so?
Well, I'll give you my email that you can put in the show notes, and they are welcome to email me. And then they can also go to Amazon, and you can either type in the name of the book, which is Restoring the Broken, or you can type in my name, Larry Brant, Larry, Brant, and then they'll see the book pop up, and they can purchase it and read through it. And again, with my email that I'm going to give you to put into the show notes, they are welcome to reach out to me and ask questions. And quite frankly, I'm not going to say I know it all, but if I don't know the answer to the question, I'm going to do some research and do my very best to help them find out, because I want to get the word out about moral injury, because a lot of times in the church we mistake it for other things. We may mistake it for backsliding, we may mistake it for burnout, we may mistake it for somebody getting mad at someone else and just dropping out of the church. Um, and so, uh, to just really try to help the church become, and individuals, just plain individuals, become a safe space for these folks, and realize that there is a path back. There is a path of restoration to come back from moral injury, and that God loves you and is ready to open up his arms and wrap them around you.
Absolutely wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
And thank you so much for the invitation. I was very honored to be here, and I look forward to hearing from your listeners.